we're focusing on, in the next 4 weeks, looking at this series called At the Table, focusing on stories throughout the Bible where people sat and had a meal, and it's going to seem unconventional, but we're going to look at some great stories. Today we're going to focus on Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is in the Old Testament. Next week I'm going to look at Passover and how they correlate together. But I want to think about the meals you have had in the last 24 hours. So take a moment, think about it. I've had a lot of meats and cheeses. It's seeming to be a bad idea now. What did you eat? Where did you have your meal? And how did you feel about it? Like, were you like, oh, crap, I forgot to eat. I'm just going to grab this McDonald's breakfast sandwich and this large Coke, and it's going to be great. Or you're like, I'm going to take the time and, make my table look pretty. How you see the table is going to affect how you think about this series. So whatever memories you have, good or bad, we're going to look at those. So my dad's memory of the table, my dad was one of 8, and they had puffed wheat and puffed rice every morning for breakfast, unless it was Christmas, and they got to have one sugary cereal. This is back in the day. And my Papa Festa's method was speak when spoken to, and one time my grandfather was addressing my grandmother at the table, and my dad talked out of turn, and my dad was like, he was not, a tall man. He's like, but I swear, his hand just came right out and went, fatash, and said, speak when spoken to, son. And then my dad was like, okay. And so that was the table my dad was used to. My Nana's table was this small oak table that I now have at my house, and it was my mom and my aunt and my uncle and my Nana and Pa, and they would every meal was at that table. Like Nana did not let you stand up and have a meal. You will sit down. Like when you walked to Nana's house, she would say, are you hungry, Jen? And I'm like, no, Nana, I just ate. Well, get in the pantry and get a paper plate. And then you sat down with your paper plate and you ate. At my house, too, we had like a longer-ish oak table where the 4 of us, me, my brother, my mom, and dad would eat. And pretty much every meal we would eat at the table unless it was Saturday night and the Chicago Bulls were playing. That was the only time that we could eat not at the table. So you would take your plate and you'd sit on the couch and you'd watch Michael Jordan just for hours upon end. Now, this is just what happens when you live in the Midwest, and there's nothing better to watch than the phenomenal Michael Jordan. So I just want you to think about your childhood, think about your table, think about meals that you've had. Because the table is so important, and it's ingrained in us to be in community. And we're going to look at these stories and figure out why the table and meeting with people at the table is at the core of who we are. So we're going to look at Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 30. And I want to give you a little bit of a history first. So it's in the Old Testament. I love the Old Testament. Moses is my Bible crush. If you don't have one, you should get one. It just really kind of gives you a frame of reference on hey, who do I relate to the most? Moses. Not that he couldn't speak for himself, because I can very clearly do that myself. But he got some dope perks. He got a staff that could literally do anything. I would like that. I think of Gandalf, Lord of the Rings style, and I'm like, gosh, how cool would that be? Then I just go in a long beard. It's just great. So get you a Bible crush if you don't have one. Don't say Jesus. He's taken by everyone, okay? But here's the thing. Right before we look at Exodus chapter 12, we have to look at what happened before. So Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, and then there's all these, 12 tribes of Israel are there, and that's all great and good. And then they get enslaved by Egypt, and they are enslaved for over 400 years. And then Moses goes down the river in a little basket. Oh, Pharaoh's mom's like, oh, hey, this is mine now. So that happened. And Moses grows up. He realizes he's an Israelite, kills somebody, and was like, oh, no, I must flee to the forest. And there he goes. And God speaks to him through a burning bush like, hey, you're going to lead these people out. Congratulations, you win. And he's like, I'm going to need some friends to help me. And Jesus is all about friendship. So he's like, yes, I will give you your brother. He'll be your friend, and you will have a great time. And what's happened is, what I love, if you read Exodus, and every time they acknowledge Pharaoh, it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart before every miracle. So this last one, so there's been the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness, plague against livestock, festering boils. It's been a great time in Egypt. And we get to read the last of the 10. And I want you to think about, when I read the story, you can have a few frame of references. Like, what if this was you back in Egypt and you've watched all this happen? Like, you've watched all these plagues, and God's like, oh, just one more, and then I promise you're going to come out. And you're like, well, there's already been 9, so boop, boop, boop. I don't know about you. So just think about that. So we're going to read it. It's going to be long, and you're going to love it because it's the Word of God, and it's pretty fun. So Exodus chapter 12, it says, while the Israelites were still in the land of Egypt, the Lord gave the following instructions to Moses and Aaron. From now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. Announce to the whole community of Israel that on that 10th day of this month, each family member must choose a lamb or a young goat for a sacrifice, one animal for each household. If a family is too small to eat a whole animal, let them share with another family in the neighborhood. Divide the animal accordingly to the size of each family and how much they can eat. The animal you select must be a 1-year-old male, either a sheep or a goat with no defects. Take special care of this chosen animal until the evening of the 14th day of this first month. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel must slaughter their lamb or young goat at twilight. They are to take some of the blood and smear it on the sides and the tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the animal. That night, they must roast the meat over a fire and eat it along with bitter salad greens and bread made without yeast. Do not eat any of the meat raw or boiled in water. The whole animal, including the head, legs, and internal organs, must be roasted over a fire. Do not leave any of it until the next morning. Burn whatever is not eaten before morning. These are your instructions for eating this meal. Be fully dressed. Wear your sandals and carry your walking stick in your hand. Eat the meal with urgency, for this is the Lord's Passover. On that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. But the blood on your doorsteps will serve as a sign marking the house where you are staying. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. This plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. This is a day to remember. Each year, from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is a law for all time. For 7 days, the bread must be made without yeast. On the first day of the festival, remove every trace of yeast from your homes. Anyone who eats bread made with yeast during the 7 days of the festival will be cut off from the community of Israel. On the first day of the festival, and again on the 7th day, all people must observe an official day for holy assembly. No work of any kind may be done on these days except in the preparation of food. Celebrate this festival of unleavened bread, for it will remind you that I brought your forces out of the land of Egypt on this very day. This festival will be a permanent law for you. Celebrate this day from generation to generation. The bread you must eat must be made without yeast from the evening of the 14th day of the first month until the evening of the 21st day of that month. During those 7 days, there must be no trace of yeast in your homes. Anyone who eats anything made with yeast this week will be cut off from the community of Israel. These regulations apply to both foreigners living among you and to the native-born Israelites. During those days, you must not eat anything made with yeast. Wherever you live, eat only bread made without yeast. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel together and said to them, Go, pick out a lamb or young goat for each of your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Drain the blood into a basin. Take a bundle of hyssop branches and dip it into the blood. Brush the hyssop across the top and sides of the door frames of your house. And no one may go out through the door until the morning. For the Lord will pass through the land to strike down the Egyptians. But when he sees the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe, the Lord will pass over your home. He will not permit his death angel to enter your house and strike you down. Remember, these instructions are a permanent law that you and your descendants must observe forever. When you enter the land the Lord has promised to give you, you will continue to observe this ceremony. Then your children will ask, What does this ceremony mean? And you will reply, It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. And though he struck the Egyptians, he spared our families. When Moses had finished speaking, all the people bowed down to the ground and worshipped. So the people of Israel did just as the Lord commanded through Moses and Aaron. And that night at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn sons in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn sons of the Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn son of the prisoner in the dungeon. Even the firstborn of their livestock were killed. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the people of Egypt woke up during the night, and loud wailing was heard throughout the land of Egypt. There was not a single house where someone had not died. That's a lot. There's a lot to take in on that. So I want you to imagine you're setting up for Passover and what that first Passover had to sound like. Like you literally hear this angel of death and wailing while you're eating like a meal. Had to be a little awkward. I work with middle schoolers. It had to be super awkward. And you just think about what that first meal meant to what it means now. Passover is still celebrated. Like, does it still have that same effect? And that's what I think about. I think of the table, how they set it, because I like pretty things. But I also think of, like, what they were feeling. Like, what was a little kid thinking? Like, oh, I'm just having dinner. Versus, like, what was their parent thinking? What I love about this is I love Moses in the Old Testament, so there you go. But I love in verse 4 where it highlights to share with another family in the neighborhood. And at Blue Ridge, we talk about love, growing, and serving. Like, love, you're in community together, and you grow, and then you serve, and it's great. What I love about this is it says, not your friend that you know, or like not your like a family that you're friends with. Literally someone in the neighborhood say, hey, I can't finish this. Can you please come over? And how many times do we open our door to our true neighbors? And I also think about that we are designed to be in community and across the table in mourning and in celebration. Because this first time, they're hearing people are mourning outside, but the Israelites are celebrating internally, waiting to see what God's going to do. And that what I love about the table is you can sit across the table from someone after they've lost a parent or a grandparent or they're going through something, and you can sit across the table and like what the power of being at the table means. I also love that they talk about God's promises, and it talks about being ready. It says in verse 11, these are your instructions for eating this meal. Be fully dressed, wear your sandals, and carry your walking stick in your hand. Like, it had to be weird. Like, your dad's, like, just eating in one hand. Like, he's ready to go. And you're just watching your dad in one hand eat. I mean, I've seen my dad eat with less hands than one. But, you know, like, what is that picture of being ready for God's promises? In my Bible, they give these super fun notes. So what it says is, eating the Passover feast while dressed for travel was a sign of the Hebrews' faith. Although they were not yet free, they were ready, and they were prepared. For God had said he would lead them out of Egypt. This preparation was an act of faith, preparing themselves for the fulfillment of God's promises. However unlikely they may seem, demonstrates our faith. So how can we be ready for God's promises? My favorite thing that my kids like to do is they're like, I really prayed for an A on that test, Jenny, and it didn't happen. And then I asked the class a question, did you study? And the answer is like, no, because I prayed about it. And I feel like sometimes we do that too. We're like, God, I really need to get out of this job. And then you know, if you're friends with me, I will say, have you applied for jobs? And you're like, no, I'm just waiting for God to just like drop something on me. This is not a cartoon. He's not going to drop a free job on you. I mean, he might. But how sometimes do we like trust that God's going to do something and we're like, I'm just going to be hands off. It's fine. He'll figure it out. Like, how do we need to be ready in action? What I love about the walking stick is they were ready to get up. Like, if God was like, hey, we're going to leave now, mid-meal, you'd be like, I'm sorry, man, I haven't had dessert. You're going to get up and go. And that's the kind of faith that God wants us to have. A faith that we can say, what do I need to do to partner with you, God? And that's what I love. In verses 21 through 23, it talks about how he talks about grabbing a lamb. And I like how he talks about caring for it. Like in the beginning verses, he's like, take care of this lamb, and it's going to be so great. And you're like, kids, don't name it. Don't name this. You're not going to like it later. But how he takes special care of that one lamb and to make sure it's perfect and no defects. And in verses 21 through 23, he talks about the importance of that lamb. And what I love is God said, I need you to shed that innocent blood. Because I need to save you, because you can't save yourselves. which is why when you look at the rest of the Old Testament, and every time, like, you swore, you're like, oh, now I have to buy a couple of doves because I swore at this guy that cut me off in his chariot. And you would go to the temple, and you would shed innocent blood to make up for their sin. And it was this constant process. And I love that God says, take the blood and put it on your door. Like, that had to be a fun image. Like, hey, Dad, what are you doing? Oh, just paint the door with blood. It's cool. You'll thank me later. I just can't get that picture out of my head. Like, preparing to hear other people suffer while they were going to get free. This is how my brain works. And I love in verse 23 where it talks about, where'd it go in my Bible? It says, for the Lord will pass through the land to strike down the Egyptians, but when he sees the blood on the tops and sides of the door frames, the Lord will pass over your home. He will not permit his death angel to enter your house and strike you down. And if you're the Israelites, you feel that God has struck you down. They've been praying for over 400 years to be free. And they watched, like, their great-grandma and their great-great-great-great-great-grandma pray for freedom. And that this is the generation that's going to get it. I love the endurance piece, because sometimes you're like, I prayed for 2 weeks and this didn't happen, so I'm just going to give up on it. I think it was C.S. Lewis who had friends that were unbelievers, and I don't know how you could not be friends with C.S. Lewis and be an unbeliever. It shocks me. My friend Sherry, her best friend Margaret, is not a believer, and I'm like, how can you be friends with Sherry and not love Jesus? Like, it just boggles my mind. But they just prayed that God was going to move regardless if it was going to happen. That's why I love Hebrews 11, because it talks about all these people prayed for these things that never happened in their time. It never happened in their generation. But they were faithful to pray. Blows my mind. And I love that God talks about he will not permit his death angel to enter your house and strike you down. And sometimes we think that God is ready to strike us down. That we think that he is just waiting to, like, smack us with the stuff. And you're like, oh, yeah, I deserve that. No. That is the opposite of how God is. God is waiting to partner with you and to show you his extravagant love by shedding somebody else's blood to cover your sins. And I love in verse 24 through 27, it talks about the history of the meal and the importance of remembering. And it says, this will be a permanent law. And it says that twice. 3 times? I didn't count, sorry. You can read it later and find out. It's long, you'll enjoy it. So he talks about this is a permanent law forever, that you will always remember this. And I like how it says, your children will ask, what does this ceremony mean? And you will reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. Like, how cool. Like, year 1, you're out of Egypt, and you're celebrating Passover. Your energy has to be a little bit more significant than the year before, because you know you're out of Egypt. But, like, what is it on year 2, and year 3, and year 40 when they still haven't made it to the promised land? Like, what has happened? And I think sometimes we look at, like, holidays and traditions, and we're like, I really do not want to go over to their house. Like, I do not want to sit across the table from that person. And then we've forgotten why we're sitting there and how significant the Passover meal was. I mean, for my family, I'll just be real because I'm a real person. My mom's side had my Nana and Pa, and it was my uncle, and my uncle smoked, and my dad hates smokers. So my uncle would start, like, toking up in the house with my Nana, who also smoked at the time, and my dad was like, brr, brr, brr. And my dad is not a quiet person, and he will let you know when he's upset. Also like me. That's where I get it. You're welcome. So my dad would be like, I'm going to the car, and like, go to the car, and my mom was like, okay, I guess we're going to leave now. And I was like, awkward. And you think it would change? Oh, no. Every Thanksgiving. Every Christmas. It was like clockwork. Even Easter. And the highlight of Easter was for me, because my uncle had, like, those big O, like, frame glasses, and it was bifocals. He would always hide an Easter egg, like, right there in his eyeglasses. And then later smoke, and my dad's like, seriously, you're going to have fun with the kids, and then you're going to blah, blah, blah. And what's the point? What's the point of the table? Like, sometimes we get so distracted by the stuff that irritates us that we miss out on, like, I will forever remember my uncle putting that stupid egg in his eye, and, like, he would pretend he was sleeping, but I'm also going to remember my dad being upset about it. And, like, what are we showing our kids when we can't tolerate even our own family? Because guess what? Your family's forever. And that's why I think it's funny when, like, you go to college and you're like, my friends and my family, and it's going to be so great. And then you all move away. Ha, 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 ha. Guess who's still there? Your family. And I think what I love about the Passover meal is to be able to share something with my kids, like the history of it. I'm a history nerd. I wish I would have been a history teacher. But, like, that you get to share that. And sometimes, like, we forget the beauty of celebration. I learned this from my friend in California. I was like, oh, man, today was a great day. She's like, open up a bottle of champagne. And I was like, well, this is not a champagne celebration. It was just a good day. She's like, oh, no, crack open that bottle, girl. And I was like, oh, this was borderline. Are we drinkers or are we celebrating? And she was like, no, I feel like we need to celebrate little victories. And I was like, you are a genius. This is great. And I think sometimes, like, when our kids do something great, we're like, hey, good job. Like, a little party's in order. I will plan it. I got no shame. But sometimes we forget to celebrate the good things, and we only look at how something isn't happening. Like, I think it's crazy when every natural disaster happens, how God gets blamed. But, like, you see a miracle in a hospital, and God doesn't get any of the credit. That's not going to be on the national news. And how we need to celebrate what God is doing in our lives and in the lives of our kids, just to celebrate. God is a God of parties and togetherness. He literally said, forever you will celebrate Passover. I mean, not like that. He wasn't angry about it, but I'm a girl, so it's hard to do that godly voice. But forever, he wanted them to remember that this was hard, and he knew it, but he's going to get you out of it. Like the bitter herbs, if you've ever actually truly eaten Passover, I did this with my kids. Sherry Lewis has a Passover video. She'll walk you right through it. That's right, Lamb Chops Play Along, educational. Thank you, cartoons. Like, when you eat, like, horseradish, it's so gross. It is vile. If you enjoy eating horseradish, I'm impressed by you. But you're supposed to taste and remember that something was bad. Like, when you go through a season of life and you're like, God, this sucks. Oh, this is really good. And you look back and you're like, oh, I get it now. Like, that's kind of how Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread had to feel. Especially the Feast of Unleavened Bread was them getting out of there and remembering that they were previously enslaved. Like, for 400 years. That's a long time. And I love I'm going to look at two more things. In verse 28, I love the obedience of the Israelites and the foreigners, because there were some other foreigner people that were living in that land that saw that this God, I am, was doing things, and they were like, I'm going to be all up on that. Like, I'm going to ride this Jesus bandwagon. Take me. I'm going to come too. And I love that it said, so the people of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded through Moses and Aaron. Like, were like, you know what? I really don't like bitter herbs, so no. Oh, no. They did everything. They were so obedient to what God was asking them to do. And he could have said, hey, I need you to put on a Speedo and just be ready to jump in the river because we're all going swimming. And they would have done it. But instead he said, grab your walking stick, be ready. And they were all obedient and ready. And the two verses that just, like, blow my mind, I literally just wrote, wow. The last two verses where it says, at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn sons in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn son of the Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn son of the prisoner in the dungeon. Even the firstborn of their livestock were killed. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the people of Egypt woke up during the night, and loud wailing was heard throughout the land of Egypt. There was not a single house where someone had not died. Like, just the gravity of that. Of that someone had to die so that the Israelites could be free. Like, to me, I'm like, oh, that was kind of rude, God. Like, did you really have to take over everyone? But later you see this picture of God trying to protect his people and all the Israelites that had died during oppression. And not that God is like eye for an eye kind of deal, but I just love that he is considerate even in that moment where the Egypt people were so hurt now that they were like, yeah, you guys got to go. They could deal with the boils and the locusts, but, like, you take out your family, like, that just changes your perspective. And so when I read this story, I look at my own life and what traditions and milestones do I need to celebrate? Like, I will celebrate literally anything. Michael was writing his doctorate, his dissertation. It was like, how many pages? A futon, right? How many pages? I guess a futon. That's an accurate statement of a doctor, guys. A futon of pages. And literally every time he wrote a chapter, I bought a banner, and I would just change the chapter. I was like, yay for chapter 9. Yay for chapter 3. Because I was like, you know how hard it is to probably write a doctorate? I mean, I get irritated when people are like, can you please write this paper and tell me how you feel? I'm like, tell you where you can feel that paper. But like Michael was dedicated to get this done. And I was like, I have to celebrate everything. Like I literally had like incentives. I was like, free ice cream for you. Free Slurpees for you. And he was like, all right. Michael's not much for celebration, but I was like, you have to like, sometimes you have to look at stupid stuff like, and that's going to change your day. My cousin, when his dad died when he was really young, he was super depressed. When you lose your dad at any age, when you lose him at like 5 or 6, and you're used to like that fun dad that you played ball with and did stuff with, that changes your trajectory of your life. And my aunt asked him every day, I want you to tell me 3 good things about today. And they can't be the same as yesterday, and they can't be the same tomorrow. And it forced my cousin into this attitude of gratefulness. And I think of the Israelites who've just spent day after day being enslaved, being hurt, being abused. And if God said, hey, give me 3 good things about today, would they be able to answer with 3 good things? Would I be able to answer with 3 good things? And it's this attitude of gratefulness and thankfulness and bringing joy back to the table. Because we need to remember both times. Like, we can't just live life, tell my girls, like, when you accept Christ, it's not just going to be all like roses and unicorns. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, that was so great. I'm always good, so I can do whatever I want that's stupid, and then Jesus still loves me. I'm like, now I teach you philosophy about Jesus, and I walk you through these things. Because you need to remember the good times and the bad times. And so the question I want you to think about over the next month, and as you have people over, is who will be at your table? Like, we literally bought our house so I could have a formal and an informal dining room. And do you know how rare a house is like that now? Non-existent. And I even bought chairs for the bar because I was like, there are going to be so many pieces and places for people to eat. Because I got this table that holds 12, that holds 3. Kids' table can hold 4. I got a card table that holds 4. Like, that's how I planned my house, of how many people can I fit in here. It's 40, in case you're wondering. 50 gets a little crowded. But it's possible. I've done it. And what are you going to learn at the table? Like, maybe there's a neighbor that you need to invite where God said, like, bring your neighbor. Like, what are you going to learn from when you sit across the table? And really look in their eyes and say, man, how are you? And your table is going to look different. Like, if you don't have, like, a dining room table, like a coffee shop table is great. Like, just to be in community and to see people face to face and hear a story. God is a God of face to face. He's a God of community. Like, I look out at nature and everyone's like, oh, snow sucks. And I'm like, how creative is God that every snowflake is different? I'm going to say pretty creative. Just a thought. And when people see rain, they're like, oh, I hate the rain so much, especially in California because they get really irritated when something affects their perfect sunshiny day. It is like, it's the day before Christmas at the mall. That's how people feel about it. And I'm just like, oh, that's so great. I love rain. Why did I straighten my hair is my second thought. But what are we going to learn when we sit across the table from people? And next week when we look at Passover, we're going to look at just the 12 that were at the table with Jesus. And how that table looks drastically different than the Passover table. But what are we going to learn there? So that's pretty much it. I want you guys to truly love the table as a place for community because God has designed us for community and togetherness. At camp, we have to do these fun activities the first night where you like hold onto a rope and you have to like make a chant about being together and how staying together is important. And I just said togetherness is key, and one of my girls was like, that's our chant. And how stupid you sound yelling, togetherness is key, as you run all around camp going to all these different things. But we are designed to be together with people because that's how we see God. Like when I hear someone's story, I look at them and I'm like, wow, that's a characteristic of God that I would not have thought about. Like, when people are really quiet, like Michael's really quiet, but when he says something, it's super profound, and I'm like, wow. I talk a lot. Maybe I need to listen more. Like, that's what I think about. And when a girl is like crying, telling me about like stuff that's happening at her house, I'm like, wow, God, where do you get to go and be and heal that? Like, wow. And God treasures that time at the table. So take time with God at your table, and just love. I'm not saying to love the holidays and love your family better, but I mean, yeah, God will probably teach you that. So, fun fact. But just love being in community, and in community with God, because he just desires that. He desires to pull out a chair and say, hey, tell me about your day. Tell me 3 good things that happened today. Tell me 1 thing that sucked. And he wants to hear it all. So we're going to pray. And God, I just thank you for the Bible and for the stories and for the Old Testament, God, where you just showed up. And you showed up in fire and in a cloud and in the tabernacle. You showed up in Moses' staff. And that you are the same God that heals the brokenhearted. You're the same God that restores sight to the blind. And that makes the captives free. So, Lord Jesus, as we go home today and we look at our tables, God, I just pray that you just work in our hearts. Who needs to be in that chair? Whose story do we need to hear? And God, correct us if we're only listening to other people's stories and not your story. God, we want to be more like you and to have our table be inclusive and a place where community and love can gather. So God, change our hearts. Let us be more like you. In the name of Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit we pray. Amen.